The fluorescent lights in the police station interview room buzzed with an unsettling persistence, casting harsh shadows across the metal table where 3-year-old Marcus sat swinging his legs, his small hands clutching a worn stuffed elephant. His mother, Keisha Williams, held him close, her heart pounding as Officer Martinez leaned forward with practiced authority. "Ma'am, we need to ask about the dog," Martinez said, his voice carrying the weight of official procedure. "The complainant says your son took her puppy from Riverside Park this afternoon." Keisha's grip tightened around Marcus, who had started to whimper at the stern tone. "There's been a mistake. We were just coming home from daycare with our own dog. Coco belongs to us." The absurdity of the situation hit her like a physical blow. Here she was, a 28-year-old nurse who had just finished a 12-hour shift, being questioned by police because someone had called 911 claiming her toddler was a thief. The same toddler who still needed help tying his shoes and asked for bedtime stories every night. The caller was very specific, Martinez continued, consulting his notes. She said she witnessed the theft directly, claims the dog is a purebred golden retriever worth several $1,000s. Through the small window in the door, Keisha could see Coco in the hallway, her golden fur catching the light as she sat obediently beside Officer Rodriguez. The dog's tail wagged tentatively, confused by the strange surroundings, but loyal as always. It had been such an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Keisha had picked up Marcus from Little Sprouts Daycare, where he'd spent the day finger painting and learning about butterflies. They'd walked the familiar route through their neighborhood, stopping at the small park where Coco loved to chase squirrels. The autumn air was crisp, leaves crunching underfoot as Marcus giggled at his dog's playful antics. That's when the woman had appeared. Keisha remembered her distinctly now, a middle-aged white woman with carefully styled blonde hair and a designer handbag clutched against her chest like armor. She had been standing near the playground, watching them with an intensity that made Keisha's skin crawl. "Excuse me," the woman had called out, her voice sharp with accusation. "That's my dog." Keisha had stopped, confused. "I'm sorry. What?" "That dog." The woman pointed at Coco, who was happily sniffing around the base of an oak tree. "You stole her from me." The accusation was so bizarre that Keisha had actually laughed. "Ma'am, this is our dog. We've had her for 2 years." But the woman wouldn't listen. She had pulled out her phone, dialing 911 with dramatic urgency. "Yes, I need police immediately. I'm at Riverside Park, and there's a theft in progress. A child has stolen my dog." Keisha had tried to reason with her, explaining that they lived just 3 blocks away, that Coco had her vaccination records and microchip registration. But the woman had continued her frantic call, describing Marcus in detail to the dispatcher. "The child is about 3 years old, black male, wearing a red jacket. The mother is tall, also black. She's clearly the one who orchestrated this." The words had hit Keisha like a slap. The casual racism, the assumption of criminality, the sheer audacity of accusing a toddler of theft. She had scooped up Marcus and called for Coco, wanting nothing more than to get home and away from this madness. But they hadn't made it home. The police had intercepted them 2 blocks away, lights flashing and sirens wailing, as if they were dangerous fugitives rather than a mother and child walking their dog. Now, sitting in this sterile room with its one-way mirror and institutional furniture, Keisha felt the full weight of the system bearing down on her family. Marcus pressed his face against her shoulder, overwhelmed by the strange environment and the tension he could feel radiating from his mother. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez said, his tone attempting patience, "I understand this is difficult. But we need to sort this out. The complainant says she can prove ownership. As if summoned by his words, the door opened, and the woman from the park entered. She had composed herself since their encounter, her hair now perfectly arranged and her makeup refreshed. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being believed without question. "There," she announced, pointing dramatically at Coco, visible through the window. "That's Princess. I've been looking for her for weeks." Keisha stared at her in disbelief. "Princess? Her name is Coco, and she's never been missing. We have her adoption papers from the shelter." The woman, who introduced herself as Patricia Westbrook, dismissed this with a wave of her manicured hand. "Anyone can forge papers. I have photos of Princess as a puppy, and I can describe her unique markings." She pulled out her phone, swiping through images with the practiced ease of someone who had prepared for this moment. "See, this is Princess at 8 weeks old. And look at this marking on her left ear. It's exactly the same." The photos showed a golden retriever puppy that did, indeed, bear a striking resemblance to Coco. The ear marking was particularly convincing, a small patch of darker fur that could easily be mistaken for unique identification. Officer Martinez examined the photos with professional interest. "These are compelling. Ma'am, do you have any documentation, registration papers, veterinary records?" Patricia's expression flickered slightly. "They're at home. I can get them. But surely these photos are proof enough, I mean. Look at the evidence." She gestured toward Marcus, who was now crying softly into his mother's shoulder. "This child obviously took my dog. Children don't understand property rights. They see something they want and take it." The implication hung in the air like poison. Keisha felt her anger rising, a fierce protective instinct overwhelming her usual diplomatic nature. "My son is 3 years old. He doesn't steal anything. And this dog has been part of our family since before he could even walk." "So you claim," Patricia replied coolly. "But I have photographic evidence. And frankly, your story doesn't add up. Why would you be in that particular park? It's not even in your neighborhood." The statement revealed more than Patricia had intended. How did she know where they lived? How did she know their usual routine? Keisha felt a chill of recognition, suddenly remembering seeing Patricia around their neighborhood over the past few weeks. Always watching, always lurking just at the edge of visibility. "Have you been following us?" Keisha asked, her voice steady, despite the fear creeping up her spine. Patricia's mask slipped for just a moment, a flash of something calculating crossing her features. "I've been searching for my stolen dog. When I saw you with Princess today, I knew I had to act." Officer Martinez was taking notes, his pen scratching across the paper with official significance. "Mrs. Williams, I'm going to need you to provide documentation for the dog. Registration, veterinary records, anything that proves ownership." "It's all at home," Keisha said, feeling the frustration building. "Dr. Peterson at Riverside Animal Hospital has been Coco's vet since we adopted her. He can verify everything." "The office is closed now," Martinez pointed out. "We can't verify anything until tomorrow." Patricia seized the opportunity. "Officer, I can't let this woman take my dog home for another night. Who knows what might happen? She could disappear, move away, anything." The suggestion was outrageous, but Keisha could see it taking root in the officer's mind. The system was designed to err on the side of caution, to protect property over people, especially when those people didn't fit the profile of presumed innocence. "Mrs. Williams," Martinez said slowly, "given the circumstances, I think it would be best if we held the dog overnight. just until we can verify ownership through proper channels." The words hit Keisha like a physical blow. They were going to take Coco away from them, separate her from Marcus, who had never spent a night without his beloved companion. The dog wasn't just a pet. She was family, a source of comfort and security for a little boy who had already faced too much uncertainty in his young life. "Please," Keisha said, her voice breaking slightly. "You can't do this. She's all he has. His father died in a car accident last year, and Coco has been his emotional support ever since." Marcus looked up at the sound of his father's mention, his small face crumpling with confusion and grief. "Where's Coco going? Mommy, is she coming home with us?" The innocence of the question cut through the room like a blade. Here was a child who had lost his father, who found comfort in the unconditional love of a dog, being accused of theft by a stranger who seemed to know far too much about their lives. Patricia watched the scene with cool detachment, unmoved by the obvious distress of the child. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said, her words carrying no genuine sympathy. "But that doesn't give you the right to keep my dog." Officer Rodriguez entered the room, having completed his initial paperwork. "Martinez, we need to talk." He jerked his head toward the hallway, clearly wanting to discuss something privately. The two officers stepped outside, leaving Keisha alone with Patricia and Marcus. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken accusations and barely contained rage. "Why are you doing this?" Keisha asked quietly, not wanting to upset Marcus further. Patricia's smile was cold and calculating. "Some people need to learn their place. You can't just take whatever you want and expect no consequences." The mask was fully off now, revealing the ugly truth beneath. This wasn't about a stolen dog. This was about power, about putting a black family in their place, about using the system as a weapon against people who couldn't fight back. Keisha felt the weight of generations of injustice pressing down on her shoulders. How many times had scenes like this played out? How many families had been torn apart by false accusations and institutional bias? How many children had learned to fear the very people who were supposed to protect them? The officers returned, their expressions grim. "Mrs. Williams," Martinez said, "we're going to need to take the dog into custody, pending verification of ownership. You'll be able to retrieve her tomorrow, once we've confirmed the paperwork." "And if I refuse?" Keisha asked, knowing the answer but needing to hear it spoken aloud. "Then we'll have to consider this obstruction of justice," Martinez replied. "I don't want to arrest you in front of your son, but I will if necessary." The threat hung in the air like a sword. Keisha looked at Marcus, who was watching the adults with wide, frightened eyes. She couldn't put him through the trauma of seeing his mother arrested, couldn't add that horror to everything else he'd already endured. "Fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I want this on record. I want it documented that you're separating a child from his support animal, based on the word of a stranger." Patricia's satisfaction was palpable. She had won this round, used the system exactly as she'd intended. "I'll be back tomorrow to collect Princess," she announced. "Make sure she's properly cared for." As they prepared to leave, Marcus finally understood what was happening. "Coco!" he cried, reaching toward the hallway where his dog waited. "I want Coco." The sound of his distress echoed through the sterile corridors, a heartbreaking reminder of the human cost of prejudice and false accusations. Keisha carried him out of the station, his small body shaking with sobs that seemed to tear pieces from her soul. That night, Marcus wouldn't sleep. He sat by his bedroom window, watching for Coco's return, asking over and over when she was coming home. Keisha called her sister, her mother, anyone who might offer comfort or advice. But what could they say? The system had failed them, just as it had failed so many others. But Keisha wasn't going to give up. She spent the night gathering evidence, printing out veterinary records, adoption papers, and photos that documented Coco's life with their family. She called Dr. Peterson's emergency line, explaining the situation and asking for his help. She even reached out to the animal shelter where they'd adopted Coco, desperate to build an unshakable case. The next morning brought unexpected developments. Officer Rodriguez called early, his voice tight with professional concern. "Mrs. Williams, we need you to come back to the station. There's been a development in your case." Keisha's heart raced. What kind of development? Is Coco okay? "The dog is fine," Rodriguez assured her. "But there's something you need to know about Ms. Westbrook's claims." At the police station, Keisha was greeted by a different atmosphere. The skepticism from the previous day had been replaced by something approaching embarrassment. Martinez looked uncomfortable as he explained the situation. "Mrs. Williams, we did some digging into Ms. Westbrook's story. Turns out she's filed similar complaints before, 3 times in the past year, to be exact." The revelation was stunning. 3 times. 3 different families, all claiming they stole her dog. All false accusations. The complaints were dropped each time when the families provided proof of ownership. Rodriguez added, "There's more. We contacted the address she gave us. Turns out she doesn't actually own a dog. Never has, according to her neighbors." The pieces began falling into place. Patricia Westbrook wasn't a grieving dog owner. She was a predator who used the system to terrorize families, particularly families of color. She had perfected her method, using photos found online and emotional manipulation to turn law enforcement into her personal weapon. "But why?" Keisha asked. "Why would someone do this?" Martinez looked uncomfortable. "That's something we're still trying to understand. What we do know is that you and your son have been the victims of a false accusation. We're releasing Coco to you immediately, and we're filing charges against Ms. Westbrook." The relief was overwhelming, but it was tempered by anger. "What about the trauma you put my son through? What about the night he spent crying for his dog?" The officers exchanged glances. "Mrs. Williams, I understand your frustration. We followed procedure, but maybe our procedures need to be examined." When Coco was brought out, her reunion with Marcus was everything a mother could hope for. The little boy buried his face in her golden fur, whispering secrets and promises that he'd never let anyone take her away again. The dog seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, staying close to Marcus with protective devotion. But Patricia Westbrook wasn't finished. When she arrived at the station expecting to collect her dog, she found herself facing charges instead. Her composed facade cracked when confronted with the evidence of her pattern of false accusations. "This is ridiculous," she protested. "I'm the victim here. These people are trying to steal my dog." Detective Sarah Chen, who had been assigned to investigate the case, was unmoved by the performance. "Ms. Westbrook, we've documented your history of false reports. We've also discovered that you've been conducting surveillance on the Williams family for weeks." The evidence was damning. Patricia had been photographing Keisha and Marcus, following their routines, learning their schedules. She had chosen them specifically, targeting a single mother and her child because she thought they would be easy victims. "I was protecting my property," Patricia insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "You don't own a dog. Chen said flatly. You've never owned a dog. The photos on your phone were downloaded from internet sites. You fabricated this entire story. The confrontation was devastating for Patricia. Faced with irrefutable evidence of her deception, she finally broke down. You don't understand the stress I've been under. My divorce, my job loss, everything falling apart. I just wanted to feel powerful again, to make someone else hurt the way I was hurting. The admission was chilling in its honesty. Patricia had weaponized racism and institutional bias to make herself feel better, using the pain of others as a balm for her own wounds. She had turned the police into her personal army, deployment them against innocent families to satisfy her need for control. The story might have ended there, with Patricia facing charges and the Williams family reunited with their dog. But Marcus had other plans. The trauma of the previous night had awakened something in the 3-year-old, a fierce protectiveness that demanded justice. Bad lady hurt Coco, he told his mother that evening as they sat together on the couch. Bad lady hurt us. Keisha stroked his hair, marveling at his understanding of the situation. Yes, baby. The bad lady hurt us. But she can't hurt us anymore. Other kids, Marcus asked, his young mind grasping the broader implications. Bad lady hurt other kids. The question broke Keisha's heart. At 3 years old, Marcus was already learning about injustice, about the world's capacity for cruelty, but he was also learning about resilience, about fighting back against those who would abuse their power. Dr. Peterson arrived that evening to check on Coco, bringing with him a folder full of documentation that proved beyond doubt the dog's history with the Williams family. But more importantly, he brought news that would change everything. Keisha, he said quietly, I've been thinking about what happened yesterday. This woman, Patricia Westbrook, she needs to be stopped. And I think I know how to do it. Dr. Peterson had been documenting Patricia's pattern of false accusations, collecting evidence from other families who had been targeted. He had also been in contact with civil rights organizations, journalists, and attorneys who specialized in cases of harassment and discrimination. She's not just targeting random families, he explained. She's specifically going after people of color, single mothers, families she thinks won't fight back. It's a systematic campaign of terror. The revelation added another layer to the horror. Patricia wasn't just a troubled individual acting out her personal pain. She was a predator who had identified vulnerable targets and used the system to attack them with impunity. Over the following days, more victims came forward. The Lopez family, who had been accused of stealing Patricia's cat. The Johnson family, who had been accused of taking her bicycle. The Singh family, who had been accused of stealing her garden gnome. Each story followed the same pattern: false accusations, police involvement, family trauma, and eventual dismissal when the truth emerged. But the damage had been done. Children had been traumatized, families had been torn apart, and trust in institutions had been shattered. Patricia had used the system like a weapon, knowing that her privilege and the implicit bias of law enforcement would work in her favor. The media attention that followed was intense. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as a case study in the abuse of 911 systems and the weaponization of police against communities of color. Patricia found herself at the center of a national conversation about false accusations, racial profiling, and the need for police reform. The courthouse steps became a staging ground for protests and counter-protests. Supporters of the Williams family gathered with signs reading, "Justice for Marcus," and "Stop False Accusations." Patricia's supporters, a smaller but vocal group, claimed she was being persecuted for trying to protect her property. The trial, when it finally came, was a media circus. Patricia had hired an expensive attorney who tried to portray her as a victim of mental illness, someone who deserved sympathy rather than punishment. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the pattern of behavior was undeniable. Marcus, now 4 years old, was too young to testify, but his presence in the courtroom was powerful. He sat quietly with his mother, Coco at his feet, a living reminder of the human cost of Patricia's actions. The judge, a stern woman with decades of experience, seemed particularly moved by the sight of the child who had been traumatized by the defendant's lies. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They presented evidence of Patricia's surveillance activities, her pattern of false accusations, and the psychological harm she had inflicted on multiple families. Expert witnesses testified about the long-term effects of such trauma on children, particularly children of color who already faced systemic discrimination. Dr. Peterson took the stand to describe the medical evidence that proved Coco's ownership, including microchip records and vaccination histories that dated back years. His testimony was clinical but powerful, establishing beyond doubt that Patricia's claims were fabricated. But it was Detective Chen's testimony that truly exposed the scope of Patricia's activities. She had been conducting what amounted to a campaign of terror, targeting families based on race and perceived vulnerability. Her phone contained hundreds of photos of innocent people, detailed notes about their routines, and even crude psychological profiles that revealed her strategic thinking. The defendant didn't just make false accusations. Chen testified. She studied her victims, learned their weaknesses, and crafted her lies specifically to cause maximum harm. This wasn't impulsive behavior. It was predatory. Patricia's attorney tried to mount a defense based on mental illness and personal trauma, but the evidence of premeditation was too strong. The jury saw through the attempts at sympathy, recognizing that Patricia's actions were not those of someone suffering from delusions, but of someone who had weaponized the system for personal gratification. The verdict was swift and decisive: guilty on all counts of filing false police reports, harassment, and stalking. The judge's sentence was equally clear: 2 years in prison, substantial fines, and a permanent restraining order preventing contact with any of the victim families. But the real victory came in the changes that followed. The police department implemented new policies for handling ownership disputes, requiring more evidence before seizing property and providing better protection for accused parties. The district attorney's office established a unit dedicated to prosecuting false accusers, sending a clear message that such behavior would not be tolerated. Most importantly, the case sparked a broader conversation about the abuse of emergency services and the need for accountability. Other jurisdictions began examining their own policies, looking for ways to prevent the weaponization of 911 calls against vulnerable communities. Marcus, now older and more aware of what had happened to him, became something of a symbol for the movement. His story was told in classrooms and community centers, a powerful reminder that injustice could happen to anyone, but that ordinary people had the power to fight back. The civil lawsuit that followed was equally significant. Patricia was ordered to pay substantial damages to all the families she had harmed, compensation that would help cover therapy costs and other expenses related to the trauma she had caused. The police department also settled with the families, acknowledging that their procedures had been inadequate and committing to better training and oversight. Years later, Marcus would still remember the night Coco was taken away, but he would also remember the morning she came back. He would remember the power of truth, the importance of standing up to bullies, and the way a community could come together to protect its most vulnerable members. Keisha, now working as a patient advocate at the hospital where she had been a nurse, often spoke about the experience. She talked about the trauma, but also about the healing, about the way justice could be delayed but not denied, about the importance of fighting back against those who would abuse their power. Patricia Westbrook served her full sentence, emerging from prison to find her world irrevocably changed. The media attention had made her a pariah, unemployable and unwelcome in the community she had once terrorized. She moved away, leaving behind a legacy of shame and a powerful reminder that actions have consequences. But the story didn't end with punishment. It ended with hope, with a community that had learned to protect itself, with systems that had been reformed, and with a little boy who had learned that the arc of the moral universe, while long, does indeed bend toward justice. Coco, now an old dog with graying fur, still slept beside Marcus's bed every night. She had become something more than a pet. She was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that love and truth are stronger than hatred and lies. And in the quiet moments before sleep, when Marcus would stroke her golden fur and whisper his dreams, she would thump her tail against the floor, a gentle percussion of contentment and security. The case of Patricia Westbrook versus the Williams family had become a landmark in the fight against false accusations and racial profiling. It had shown that ordinary people could stand up to institutional bias, that communities could protect their most vulnerable members, and that justice, while sometimes delayed, was not just a dream, but an achievable reality. In the end, truth had prevailed. Love had conquered hate. And a little boy and his dog had taught the world that sometimes the smallest voices can create the biggest changes, that innocence protected is stronger than malice unleashed, and that, in the darkest moments, hope can still find a way to shine through. The story of Marcus and Coco became a touchstone for civil rights advocates, a reminder that the fight for justice is never over, but that every victory, no matter how small, brings us closer to a world where children can walk their dogs without fear, where families can live in peace, and where the color of one's skin doesn't determine the presumption of guilt or innocence. And in that world, a little boy and his golden retriever would always be safe, always be loved, and always be home.